Hi, I'm Sarah Runwell, the editor of fundoperator.com. I'm here today with Daniela Silcock, Head of Policy Research at the Pensions Policy Institute. Daniela is speaking at the Institutional Fixed Income Summit on the 24th of November. So ahead of that, we wanted to catch up with her to get a little bit of a flavour of what she'll be speaking about. Hi, Daniela.
Hello, nice to see you.
So my first question is, how would the decision to replace RPI with CPIH impact the gender insurance gap?
I'm going to be talking about this from the pensions angle because that's what I do, and mainly from the angle of people who are members of DB pension schemes. So pensioners or savers whose DB scheme inflates benefits or increases benefits by RPI will receive less in retirement income than they would have previously without the change. And this particularly affects women and younger people. And what this means in a sense for people individually is that they will have lower levels of retirement income and lower standards of living as a result. The reason that this affects women and younger people more than men and older people is that women have longer life expectancies. So the overall impact on their income will be greater. They'll lose a greater proportion of income. And obviously younger people have to save for longer and will be deferred in their pension for longer. So they will see a greater impact on their overall pension than people who are, say, at or in retirement already. So just to give you some stats, a 65-year-old man who's 65 in 2020 could see a reduction of around 4% to his lifetime income from his DB scheme on average, whereas a woman could see around 5%. And then if we look at deferred members, obviously there's a greater increase because there's much more time for their pension entitlement to be affected by these changes. So if we look at a person who defers for 10 years from 2020 and then takes their pension at age 65 in 2030, we'd see an average overall decrease of around 12% for men and 13% for women.
Great, thanks. And what stage is the judicial review at, and what do you think the likely outcomes are?
Also, as you know, the trustees of BT, Ford and M&S have Marks and Spencers have sought a judicial review for this. They think that the decision didn't take into account the potential impacts and the long-term impacts as well for both schemes and members. And that it's really unfair, particularly on retirees and on holders of index-linked bonds. The review is currently ongoing. There's no information available at the moment in terms of when it's likely to be published. It's quite difficult to predict the outcome. What it comes down to is that the government and the UK Statistics Authority believe that the RPI is flawed and that not rectifying this is unfair in the long term to people who pay for goods and services which increase in line with RPI, such as people buying train tickets and things like that. They also don't really want to be paying out money on index-linked bonds, which are at a higher rate than they feel is reasonable given the economic circumstances. So in order for this change to be deemed unreasonable by the judges, they will have to be convinced that this is not the case, that the RPI is not flawed and that it does not need to change. It's important to remember that with any sort of policy change like this, there will be people who are disadvantaged. And often it's a case of saying, right, well, we might need to make this change because it makes sense, but how are we going to help those who are disadvantaged? So it might be the case that they decide in the long term to ask for mitigating measures or things like that. But at the moment, the government has said it won't provide any mitigating measures when the policy goes through.
Thank you. And last one, what should institutional investors be doing to prepare for these changes? And what impact do you think it'll have on investment strategy?
So pension schemes will be affected differently depending on how hedged they are in inflation. So if you have a large proportion of RPI linked assets, you'll be much more affected than if you have a low proportion. And it will also depend on what proportion, if any, of benefits they inflate or revalue by RPI. So a pension scheme might not pay any of their liabilities in terms of RPI, which means they're not going to save on their liabilities and may have a large proportion of assets invested in RPI linked bonds, which means that they'll probably have quite a big, a larger deficit arising as a result. Alternatively, schemes which inflate benefits by RPI and maybe don't have a lot of scheme funds invested in RPI linked assets might actually come out on top. So really each scheme needs to sit down and do their own personal calculation of where they sit and what they might need to look at. We've done a calculation that for each £10 million invested in RPI linked gilts, a scheme could see a total loss of asset value of around £1 million. So we are talking about quite a significant amount of money. So once you've actually done that calculation, there's a few things schemes will need to think about. Obviously, some RPI linked assets will expire before 2030, and those won't be an issue. But it's probably worth looking in the long term to see where the deficits might arise, whether or not scheme sponsors need to make additional contributions in order to fill the new deficits. Schemes will want to look at the investments and time horizons of the fixed income assets they have that do go beyond 2030 and say, are there ways of hedging this? And recognize that some of this might already be priced into the market. The market knows this is happening now. So they're going to be preparing by pricing some of this in. And also not all RPI linked assets will necessarily change. There may be contractual protection from the change for some assets, particularly private contracts such as long-term real estate, which means that they won't necessarily indicate a loss for those assets. So it's really a very individual strategy that each scheme will need to look at.
Great, thanks, Daniela. I can't wait to hear more from you at the Institutional Fixed Income Summit on the 24th of November. Thank you.